Now, again, coming back to Epstein, I don't think that those types of quote unquote rings, those types of child sexual assault rings are like all over the place. I think Epstein was unique in that some of the very most powerful and influential people in the world were involved. I do think, in fact, I don't think, I know that there are rings of individuals, mostly men, who share what we now call CSAM, child sexual abuse materials. And that is not at all myth. That's an absolute fact and there are individuals, there are religious leaders, there are financial leaders, there are community leaders, there are educated, accomplished family men, some women, but mostly men who are involved in these rings that are trading this material.
In today's new episode of Crawlspace, we speak with Roger Canaff, an author, legal expert, and former prosecutor in the Special Victims Department. Lance, what did you think of this conversation?
Well, I love making new friends on the show, especially when people like Roger can bring conversations to the table that are difficult to discuss, like child sexual assault. He is a survivor himself, but he doesn't make that the story whatsoever. He has gone on a crusade to help children, to help women as they navigate a difficult time in their life, and to hold people's feet to the fire, hold people accountable for their actions. He also addresses issues that we know are on the horizon here that are going to escalate into bigger problems, like the use of AI when it comes to child sexual assault. It already is a big thing, and Roger is at the forefront of that. So we love talking to people who are trying to be proactive to make sure that these atrocities can be contained as much as possible.
Yeah, no question about it. And you can check out Roger's work at his website, rogercanaff.com. And he's got some books. He writes fiction books, but he's got this amazing experience. And we were thrilled to get to know him a little bit and just sort of speak about this work that he does that we really don't know too much about.
Before we get to our conversation with Roger, we just wanted to announce that we are again having a fundraiser for the nonprofit that you and I are on the board of, Private Investigations for the Missing. You can get more information on that organization at investigationsforthemissing.org. This is going to be at the end of November. We don't have a locked-in date yet, so keep your eyes peeled for that.
All right, everyone, please follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Roger.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Welcome to the podcast, Roger Canaff. How are you today?
I am well, thank you, folks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. It's a new relationship that we have here. We have a mutual friend who has connected us, and we're happy to have you on. Can you give a little background on yourself?
Sure. I was a career prosecutor for, I guess about the first half of my life. I kind of did a 180, and I do a bunch of different things now. But for the bulk of my career, I was primarily in special victims. So I started as a prosecutor in Alexandria, Virginia, a little historic town right outside of Washington, D.C. From there, I went to the National District Attorneys Association, and I was a senior attorney, basically a training specialist in their child abuse unit. I did some work in their violence against women unit as well. Then I went back into the courtroom. I was a prosecutor in New York City, in the Bronx. I was in their child abuse and sex unit. From there, I went to the Attorney General's office in New York State. I was the deputy chief of the sex offender civil management unit, kind of a different civil litigation involving sex offenders. So basically along the same lines. And then after that, I went to the United States Army, and I was an Army civilian for almost 3 years. I was embedded with the JAG Corps, and I was providing training for JAGs on investigation and prosecution of these same issues, violence within the military, sexual assault, things of that nature. And from there, I've just gone onto the training circuit. But it's been kind of a peripatetic career. I'm no longer in government officially, but I still do a decent amount of training and consulting around the country on these issues.
Yeah, and these are serious issues. And when we received your name as a potential guest for the show, we looked into you, of course, and you've been embedded in the protection of women and children. You are an expert in sexual assault, sexual abuse. When did this start for you? And when did this become, I hate to say, like your forte?
Yeah, it is. It is a forte, and that's okay. That is a part of it. I don't want to make this about myself. I mean, I am a survivor of, I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse myself. I wasn't public about that for a long, long time. It's now a part of my story. It's a part of my public platform, so it's there, and it's obviously something I'm not ashamed of. I try not to wear it on my sleeve either. It just is. I would think an army of psychologists would probably say, well, Roger, come on, somewhere back there, that's what drove you into this work, and it's possible. But honestly, I never felt that way. I became passionate about doing this kind of legal work when I was younger, but not that young. I think I was probably, when I was preparing to go into law school, I was like, I want to be a prosecutor. My father was in law enforcement. He worked for the DEA most of his professional life. And it was just something that appealed to me. I think I have kind of a strong amina, which sometimes is described as a feminine side, for lack of a better term. I think I'm pretty good with women and children, and it just seemed like a good fit for me. Of course, you can't be wedded too much to these cases. You can't be too emotional about them. So I had to take inventory of my own sort of a situation, but it really never got in the way. That's kind of where it came from. It was just a really good fit for me professionally. And the other thing is there weren't many men that were doing it. At the time that I got into prosecution in the mid to late 90s, there were very few men that wanted to get into special victims work. It was, not to be weird, but it was kind of considered women's work, in a derogatory way. It was, if you had a child abuse case, find a woman in the office. And oftentimes that was appropriate. When I got into this and I started doing these cases and I started having success with them, some wonderful female friends I have, women who I've known now for 25, 30 years, who are just the greatest people, they kind of pulled me into the training circuit. They educated me quite a bit on dynamics that I didn't know for obvious reasons. Just kind of went from there, and it's always just been a good fit.
Can you explain a little bit more about why you think this was looked down upon and more of a woman's job? And I get the idea that the victim might be more open to a woman helping them. I get that part. But was it as if other male colleagues would look at a male doing that and think that that was like not masculine?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of toxic masculinity involved there. Toxic masculinity permeates so much of our culture, and it has for so long. And I'm sorry, but prosecution was really no different. American prosecution is much like American policing. There of course, if you go federal, that's a central sort of agency that's run by the Department of Justice. But around the country, there are thousands of state and local prosecutors. Most of them are very decent and do the right thing and try to do the right thing, regardless of gender or anything else. But without a doubt, there was, and probably still is, I think, the sense that, well, if you're a man and you're going into prosecution, it's because you're kind of a law and order person, and so many men want to go after, they want to prosecute violent crimes, they want to prosecute gang stuff, they want to prosecute homicide, which of course homicide is a part of special victims work, but there just are, I think, a lot of men traditionally that have avoided this. And again, gender roles and the things that we get squeezed into. I'm sure there are thousands, if not millions, of men out there who, like me, would have been really, really good at this work, but they were steered away from it, or they were told it wasn't masculine enough, or it was, some other derogatory thing, which is, it's unfortunate and it's unfair, but I definitely think that was a part of it, and frankly, I think it probably still is.
That's unnecessary and pretty opposite, really. I feel like it's masculine to take on that work, actually.
Sure, I appreciate that, Tim. I think you're right, yeah.
Now, you mentioned homicide is part of special victims work. What else is considered part of special victims work?
Well, special victims, of course, the term in law enforcement and within the prosecution community, the term emerged certainly not until the late 80s, probably really the early 90s. Really right when I was on the cusp. I was in law school in the early 90s. Special victims denotes pretty much what it says. Traditionally persecuted minorities are among people who would be considered a special victim. Women, children, the elderly, people with disabilities. People also who are marginalized, people who are used in prostitution, people who are homeless, people who are experiencing homeless, people who are transgender, pretty much, and certainly individuals who identify as homosexual for, thankfully all of that's changing, but those were traditionally considered special victims. And it just meant that they were either people that were often underserved or people who just, from a historical, societal perspective, hadn't been treated equally. Children absolutely fall under that category. Children have been some of the most vulnerable human beings just over the course of human history. And women, of course, as we know, despite the unbelievable advances that have been made even in my lifetime since the late 60s, there's still sort of a disconnect there. So that's what Special Victims is about. The idea was, hey, let's provide some additional help. Let's provide some specific type of training so that we can focus on cases and crimes that often happen to people who don't get the proper response.
And if you're working with somebody to create this environment where they can be the person who is providing the help for the special victim, do you find it that you can identify whether or not they're going to take to it right away?
Yeah, I have been lucky in that almost everybody that I've encountered, pretty much almost down to a person, everyone that I've encountered has been receptive to me after a few minutes. There's a rapport building phase that should take place anytime a professional responder to sexual violence, somebody like me, a prosecutor or a police officer, a detective, a victim advocate, anybody like that who encounters an individual, a survivor, you can say, for the first time, has to sort of engage in a bit of rapport building to earn their trust, to explain their situation, to let them know that they're in a safe place, things of that nature. I think I do that very well. I think I've gotten better at it. I had a lot to learn when I started, but I've definitely had a few folks who have resisted, like, well, wait a second, I don't want to talk to a man about this. And there are times when I've absolutely relented. I mean, we practice a victim-centered approach. So if I'm working with somebody who doesn't feel that they can work with me for whatever reason, I do not take that personally. I let them move on. But thankfully, I put them in good hands if I can, but thankfully that hasn't happened very often at all.
When you were a prosecutor, what was your preference for type of case to prosecute and why?
It was absolutely these types of cases. It was child abuse and sexual violence. Child abuse, I'd say in particular. I had some great experiences prosecuting, and when I say great, I don't mean joyful, of course, but I mean satisfying experiences, professional experiences, prosecuting cases against individuals with disabilities, individuals who are on the margins of society. But I think child abuse was the thing that, prosecuting child abuse was the thing that I was most drawn to. I think just because, well, there are a couple of reasons. For one thing, it's a little less controversial. Just about everybody, regardless of political affiliation, everybody can agree that child abuse is horrible. Pretty much everybody can agree that sexual violence is horrible as well, but society tends to be a lot tougher on older individuals, people who are not children, basically adolescents and adults. It can be tougher to prosecute those cases because even when a child becomes 13 or 14, he or she suddenly, in the mind of some judges and some jurors and some responders from police, all the way through social services, sometimes people begin to look at them differently. Like, hey, this isn't a little angel anymore with her dolly or something like that. This is a bit of a vixen. This is a person who is asking for it, and then all of those horrible myths start to come in and those things that so child abuse tends to be, frankly, a somewhat easier to deal with in terms of getting judges and jurors to sympathize and to understand, what the victim or what the individual went through. That's not universal across the board, but that's certainly something that I've discovered.
It's so frustrating to hear that because I start to wonder, are we still in the 1680s? Are we still looking at young women who are menstruating for the first time as the devil's, breeding ground or something? Well,
we've come a really, really long way. I mean, it would be silly for me to say that we haven't, and also it would be unfair. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of the mostly women, but the women and men who have come before me who have made things so much better. So I would never, ever want to suggest that we haven't made great progress. We have. I mean, As recently as a century ago, children really, in many states, could not be witnesses, period, just from a legal standpoint, or as a practical matter, they wouldn't be listened to. They were basically considered property, up until fairly recently. There was a society for the prevention of cruelty to animals before there was any kind of a society looking at the prevention of cruelty to children. And women, of course, the status that women have had in our society and cross-culturally, not only in Western society, but in Eastern society, as well. All of those things created just a tremendous environment of vulnerability and dangerousness for those people. Now, again, we have come a long way. As late as the 80s, these kinds of issues really weren't even discussed. And if sexual violence was prosecuted, it was almost always prosecuted. It had to be almost the perfect scenario. You had to have a victim who seemed to be completely blameless, an older woman or somebody walking with their groceries to a garage who was violently attacked and, things of that nature. If that wasn't present, if there was any something that would seem to be a blemish on that victim's reputation or on their circumstances, did she invite him over? Did she walk down the wrong alley? Was she wearing the wrong clothes? Anything like that could absolutely derail a case. So the vast majority, I can say this confidently, the vast majority of sexual violence cases, or talking about adults now, but the vast majority of those cases weren't prosecuted unless they really met certain standards, because prosecutors either didn't value them themselves or they didn't think juries would value them, and they tended to shy away from them. And that's shameful. It's unfortunate. Now, again, we've come a long way since then. And where child abuse is concerned, I think we're much, much better because we're willing to discuss it. We've reached a point where people thankfully willing to come forward. We're still seeing tremendous amounts of damage done. I mean, the various cases that we've seen come up, there was the Jerry Sandusky, the Penn State case that came up. There was Michigan State that came, and again, this is not ancient history. These are things that were happening in 2011. They were happening as late as 2017, and right now we're embroiled in the Epstein case and what was going on there again up until very, very recently. So it's certainly a situation where there's still a tremendous amount of vulnerability and not enough attention, and the response is not where it should be. But I do think it's much, much, much better than it was even 15 years ago.
You mentioned the Epstein case. What is happening here? When some files are released, are we going to actually learn anything?
I mean, I hope so. Part of the problem is we don't seem to know, at least the general public. Virginia Giuffre, who unfortunately passed away in April, has a book out. I guess her state, and I'm actually looking forward to reading that. I haven't gotten a chance yet. It's quite a bit of material that I have read about it. We know what has happened to some of the players. Epstein, of course, is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in custody. What things will be revealed if and when files are released, and they're released in an unredacted manner. Man, I don't know. I would not at all be surprised if extremely powerful people are implicated at all levels, and on both sides of the political fence, just because we're just so polarized right now in terms of right and left. But I don't think that either side is going to be able to say, oh, well, thankfully people like me weren't involved in this. I think rich and powerful, almost to a person, I think rich and powerful men were involved in this, and I think they come from all walks of life. And I hope we do. No matter who, I could care less who is exposed. If that individual should be exposed, I certainly hope that's what happens. I don't know, though, politically what's going to take place or when it's going to take place.
Yeah, right. Or if any repercussions will ever come of it, because the names are so powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking about, exactly. You're talking about individuals that, there's control of the media here. There's control. Again, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to understand that the very, very top of the money and power pyramid in the world may very well be individuals in that group that are going to protect themselves at pretty much all costs. So I don't think we're going to know until, well, who knows? We may not know at all, but I'm hoping that we've moved to a place from a societal perspective where we're like, look, we want to know and we want to stop this.
Is this the beginning of a lifting of the veil about powerful people and how there are these rings of child sexual abuse that, I think most of the public have no awareness of.
It probably is. I mean, I think Epstein was an extreme case. I mean, one thing I'm always careful of is myths becoming reality and conflation and stuff like that. Like, you probably remember the 80s was the time of the so-called satanic panic, right? And there was widespread belief, and it was really, really fueled by the media at the time. There was no social media then. There was no internet. There were, of course, the really popular talk shows, and so many of those shows just picked this gab and delved into it, and there were wild assertions being made, almost all of which turned out to be untrue. There were tragic consequences, of course, for some people who were involved. Some of the Little Rascals case, the case that came out of Southern California, the case in New Jersey. There were some really, really terrible and reckless sort of legal steps taken against people, and that was bad. At the same time, there was absolutely child sexual abuse happening, and still happens today. Maybe it wasn't the product of some sort of national and underground satanic ring. I don't think it was ever that extreme. I don't think anything like that ever took place, at least on a large scale. But it was happening. And when those myths sort of take over and when they bump out reality, we end up concentrating on that. And then once that's debunked, we have a tendency to say, okay, well, this doesn't occur at all, so we really don't have to worry about it. And that's not at all where we are. Now, again, coming back to Epstein, I don't think that those types of quote-unquote rings, those types of child sexual assault rings are like all over the place. I think Epstein was unique in that some of the very most powerful and influential people in the world were involved. I do think, in fact, I don't think, I know that there are rings of individuals, mostly men, who share what we now call CSAM, child sexual abuse materials. And that is not at all myth. That's an absolute fact and there are individuals, there are religious leaders, there are financial leaders, there are community leaders, there are educated, accomplished family men, some women, but mostly men who are involved in these rings that are trading this material. So it's definitely happening and it's definitely out there. I think what was going on between Epstein and the various people that were cavorting with him, I think that's a relatively rare situation, thankfully, just because of the money and the power that was involved at the very, very highest levels.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Where does this material get generated from? How do they get their hands on this to trade it?
Many people self-produce, unfortunately. It ends up being uploaded. This has been going on for a long time. When I was prosecuting, we called it then child pornography. We don't really use the term child pornography anymore. There's nothing offensive about that term. It just, child sexual abuse materials is what we call it now. At the time that I was prosecuting this stuff, it was mostly stills. We were beginning to see video, but usually, unfortunately, it was just individuals, sick, evil, or some combination of both, who would photograph or video children in their care, or children to whom they had access, whether it was biological parents, whether it was caretakers, teachers, anyone who had access to a vulnerable child who could photograph that child in a compromising position or actually photograph themselves performing sexual acts, all those horrible things. That's been going on for quite a while. And the internet just allowed an explosion of it. At its core, and there are marvelous organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. I've been working with NCMEC for 25 years, and their headquarters were in Alexandria, where I was a prosecutor. I remember walking down the street and getting some of my very first lessons on this topic were right there at the source and talking to those individuals. This is in 1999 and 2000, and we were already seeing. There were series in those days, it's like, okay, this individual has been identified. This is an individual who's apparently from Eastern Europe or the former Soviet Union, or this individual is in a Middle Eastern country, or this individual is in Oklahoma. There were specifically identified kids, and that still continues to happen. Kids that we know have been sexually tortured, and unfortunately that has been video recorded and memorialized, and we're still seeing that. But that's, at the end of the day, that's where it comes from. And people who desire CSAM tend to look to produce it and trade it. Individuals who go onto these sites, whether it's the dark web or wherever it is that they meet, a person will come in and say, hey, I'm looking for, I want to see a young Asian boy, 3 or younger, and I want to see him in this position or that, or doing this or doing that. And somebody else in the group will say, well, what have you got? Well, I have access to a toddler. Okay. And again, I hate to be throwing these terms around and saying these things as if it's not the worst thing in the world. But at the end of the day, that's the reality of it.
Yeah, and I feel like just talking so matter-of-factly about it makes it easier to talk about. I feel like there's been a lot of times where people shy away from using certain terminology because they're afraid someone's going to get offended that they said certain words that are associated with the actions of this. Like, I have access to an infant, and what kind of position do you want this infant in? And I'll get that for you. Like, those are really like tough things to say. And that's like a really harsh reality to come to grips with. I think talking matter-of-factly about it is important.
I agree. And I'll tell you, to prosecute it or to consume it at all as a responder, you have to do that. And by the way, I'm not just saying prosecutors who handle this stuff. I'm also talking about the judges who handle it, the investigators who handle it, and the defense attorney. No one in this country is guilty until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the individuals who defend people who are accused of this, they have to consume it as well. It is a terrible, terrible experience for everyone involved.
You mentioned like their communication. Is that like a dark web thing? Like, is that like a WhatsApp? Like, how do these people communicate?
Every platform you can imagine will have individuals looking for this. The dark web has certainly benefited the underground traffic. I don't know if you've been on the dark web. It's not that difficult, and it's also not necessarily horrible. I mean, the dark web serves a purpose. The Onion router, Tor, the Tor browser, is actually very useful for things like journalists who are in war-torn countries or in societies where they can't safely report. They use the Onion router to mask their internet traffic, and that's a good thing. And there are other people who do it for all sorts of reasons that are not nefarious. Of course, if you are to download one of those browsers, which I have, again, this is all completely legitimate, and I do it for research and various things. You can get regular news outlets on the dark web. You can get all sorts of. There's a Wikipedia on the dark web. But in addition to that, pretty much the minute you walk in that door, you're going to see all sorts of illegal activity, and unfortunately, child sexual abuse materials is right there at the top. You'll see drugs, you'll see crypto, you'll see credit card numbers for sale, you'll see every type of illegal activity you can imagine being thrown at you and sold to you. And in addition to that, you will absolutely positively see, unfortunately, sexually abused children that are being offered sometimes in person for sale, usually in terms of video or stills of that nature. But the actual idea of kids used in prostitution is also a reality in the world, and that too can be facilitated in those parts of the internet.
Is that stuff that you would get into and prosecute when you were doing that? You'd like read those chats and things like that?
Not when I was. By the time the dark web came around, I was working for the Army in a civilian capacity, and we did see that. Any service, just like anywhere else in the world, you're going to have individuals who unfortunately are looking for that kind of material, and the Army would absolutely prosecute it. The military would prosecute it under the UCMJ. But I didn't see a lot of it. Definitely some. I had to consume CSAM. I had to see videos. I mean, not just related to the military. I did a lot of consulting on cases. But at the time that I was actively prosecuting cases in the late 90s and early 2000s, the technology really kind of wasn't there yet. Or if it was, it hadn't exploded the way it has now.
And how can we protect ourselves from this surge of AI, this thing that's never going to go away? Right now, you are shaking your head in kind of disgust.
It's just, I don't know. When the internet was first launched, people had similar suspicions like, okay, this is going to be a tremendously good thing for the world. It's also going to be just an unbelievably unfair and horrific tool for abuse and exploitation. And they were right. Similarly, with artificial intelligence, this is also something that has great potential. The yin yang is kind of everywhere and out there all the time. I absolutely think AI will eventually be reined in a little bit, but I think there's going to be a very, very painful period. And if you think about it, the internet's been around for 35 years or thereabouts, a little less. And we have done a decent job in some areas of, providing child protection and things of that nature, but it is still just sort of a crazy Wild West situation out there once you go online. And again, with things like the dark web and things that can mask internet traffic, prevent people from being exposed in terms of where they are and where they're coming from. Want to be careful. I'm a legal expert, not a tech expert. I know a little bit about how AI works and a little bit about the learning algorithms and things of that nature, but I don't pretend to be somebody that understands it deeply from a technological perspective. But it's a very, very scary technology.
How is it being used by these folks to share sexual abuse material?
Well, the two latest things, and I think the most dangerous things, are one is what we now know as deepfake pornography, and two, nudifying applications. Those are the two things that I think we're seeing and that are being pushed out there. And unfortunately, both of those things, deepfake pornography, so the ability for a generative AI program to create a pornographic video using the likeness, the image of somebody from just an uploaded photograph is one thing. And then the sort of nudifying apps, which, as you can imagine, it's upload a picture of somebody you know from school, upload a picture of a coworker, and in seconds, we will provide you with an AI-generated image of that person, just without their clothes on, in a nude state or in a sexual state or something of that nature. So those are the two big scary things that are happening. And the potential for victimization is just, unfortunately, it's limitless.
I know. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. I feel like there would be one camp saying that there's no harm in this. If someone's acting out a fantasy, then that's a fantasy. But we all know from doing this and being in this true crime genre, we all know that people take their fantasy to a point where it needs to be a reality.
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. There is, individuals who run some of these companies, some of the smaller tech companies who are behind it. One of the AI companies, is actually based in Hong Kong that Meta has had quite a bit of litigation with trying to stamp it out. That company has basically said, look, this is about fantasy. There really isn't a harm here. If somebody wishes to do this, as long as they're not distributing it, what's the point? Why are you getting upset? And by the way, fantasy is an oft used defense in child sexual abuse cases, or cases of child pornography, or again, what we now call CSAM. It comes up all the time. When an individual, it's found that he has 1,400 videos and thousands of images on his computer, it's a very common defense for that person's attorney to tell the court, look, this is fantasy. This is what he does. Yes, it's horrible. Most of us view it as sick and disgusting, but he's not harming real children. He has no interest in doing that. This is his outlet. But I can tell you, again, confidently, I'm a lawyer, not a psychologist, but I have worked and trained with some of the very best psychologists in the world who focus on interpersonal violence and abnormal psych. And almost all of them will tell you it is a very common progression that if an individual has X, just like an alcoholic, just like drugs, just like so many other intoxicating substances, a little bit's not going to be enough. They're going to need more. They're going to need more. They're going to need more. And eventually they're going to want to do some hands-on abuse. And the law reflects that. I mean, the law understands that there is a bit of a gateway, and the law understands that, in the United States, certainly at the federal level, you can't produce child sexual abuse materials. That's a felony under federal law. And if you transport them over state lines, which includes electronically, that's another type of federal law. And the mandatory minimums are good. I mean, it's 15 to 30 years for offenses like that. But, individuals have to be caught first, which is, often a lot harder said than done.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Real quick, at the risk of getting too political with this question, with the Epstein stuff ongoing, is this something that the Justice Department is actually going to focus on?
I hope. I mean, again, like you said, I don't want to get too political either. I mean, I don't have a very positive view of the current administration or the Justice Department when it comes to this issue. I'm not really sure. It seems obvious that the administration is concerned about the president being caught up in some of this stuff. I don't see any other way, or I don't see any other reason. Now, of course, to be fair, the other side will say, well, hell, Joe Biden sat on this for 4 years, and why didn't he do anything about it? So, the nitty gritty politics of it and the polarizing nature, it's hard to say. I guess the short answer is I absolutely hope that Congress, however it has to happen, and this is not strictly one side or the other. There are absolutely Republicans who are calling for the full release of this, and I applaud those people just like I applaud people on the other side who are calling for it. We'll see. I don't know, though. I think it's going to be very, very tough for us to come to terms with it, no matter who's in charge. But right now, I am not encouraged by what I'm seeing so far. The individuals who run the Justice Department, I'm sorry, but I'm not encouraged at all.
Yeah, it's not an encouraging environment right now at all. And it's tough to not get political with it because it is political. Because, it comes like the powerful people are politicians for the most part. And I'm concerned, and I just want to get your opinion on it. I'm concerned that we're going to gradually normalize this. And when names do come out, we're not going to think that it's as bad as it actually is because we've been, I'm misusing the term gaslit. We've been told that this really isn't a big deal anymore. Because there have been other things that we've been told aren't a big deal anymore that used to be a big deal. Is that a concern for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The normalization of anything involving exploitation of vulnerable people should be of concern to everybody because ultimately everybody is vulnerable. I mean, I'm a white male. I'm 58 years old. I make decent money. I mean, I sit on a throne of privilege compared to so many people out there. But yes, I do think there's the chance that this will be normalized. And I do think, and I hate to say it, but I do believe that that's kind of what's happening, that as we inch toward whatever revelations there are, I think there is going to be an effort to either downplay it or, hoping that there's enough time passes to where, some sort of denial can set in. Like, look, this has been hyped for so long. What's the real reality of this? Who knows exactly what happened? I'm afraid of that too. The fact that it can just be, swept under that. And, certainly we have seen political leaders who are not afraid to simply say, look, this didn't happen. Don't believe your own eyes and ears. And that's very scary.
Now, I saw this article that our friend Jackie sent about 1 in 5 young people in Spain being victims of these AI deepfakes. Yeah, so that's in Spain, right? I don't know that that's as high in America at this point, but I would have to imagine that that's probably just a sign of things to come, right?
No, absolutely. That stat I remember. There were a couple of cases. There was a case just a few years ago, and I think part of the reason that a figure emerged from Spain is just because that was one of the sort of early cases. There was a gynecologist who was a very sort of an outspoken person against this kind of thing, who worked with a group of girls who had been victimized. There were, young boys, roughly 8th grade. We see the exact same thing in the United States, and it's very, very often boys who are right there at puberty, who are, 8th grade, 9th grade, 7th grade, who, and I can understand it. If you have the tools and it's being fed to you, and, I can get into this too, but unfortunately, some of the most important social media platforms, they are making a lot of noise about how they're trying to stop this. They're either inept or they're dragging their feet or whatever, because millions of kids around the world are being told, you can do this. Here's a Nudify app. Here's your coworker. Here she is pulling her bra off. It is crazy. So that number that emerged from Spain probably emerged because of that initial case. But I would be very confident that kind of thing is happening all over the place. We've seen it in Australia. We've seen it in the U.S. And it's being pushed on kids. I mean, they're being told, this is normal. And how are they being told? Because when they open a social media app, when they open a Meta app, or when they open, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or Messenger or another platform, they're seeing these advertisements. They're seeing, the ability to do this.
How do you rein that in? I mean, is it a combination of parenting? Does the government have to step in and put restrictions and guidelines on things like this?
No, I mean, I certainly think government intervention is not necessarily inappropriate. I mean, like most people, I'm not a big privacy guy. Like I'm not as bothered by that as, I mean, there are people I know and respect who are like, I don't want the government doing anything. I don't want them tracking my internet. Now that I completely understand. On the other hand, there are all sorts of things that we are all in agreement that the government can track. Profanity, obscenity is not necessarily protected speech. To me, the biggest responsibility falls on the companies. The big tech companies really need to get ahead of this far, far, far more than they have. And, just in preparation for this call, I mean, I'm always keeping up with the research and the trends, whether it's from 404 Media or from Wired or, all sorts of sources, good people, journalists who are tracking this stuff. There are still tremendous problems. Now, huge platforms like Meta are saying, listen, we get it. We do not want these platforms out there. But they're evading us. They're creating single user platforms. So an advertisement for a Newtify app will come up, and instead of the actual tech company, it'll simply be somebody's name, Susie something or Billy whatever. It looks like a one-off, and oftentimes that has the ability to evade whatever the filters are that the tech company has in place. And again, I can't speak to the tech stuff, but I do think that the tech companies, given the amount of money that they generate, I do think they can do an absolutely better job. I don't care how many thousands of people you have to hire. And by the way, that's a traumatic thing too. My understanding is most of the big tech platforms and the social media platforms, a lot of them offshore the monitoring of this. Why can't you see somebody, frankly, taking their own life on Facebook? Why can't you see somebody putting a gun in their mouth? Believe me, that happens, and people attempt to do that kind of thing all the time. The social media companies understand that, and they do monitor it. But oftentimes the monitoring is done in a place very, very distant from where the company's headquartered. Individuals aren't paid very much. They're sitting for hours and hours and hours at a time looking at these same images and videos. It's really frightening stuff. It's very difficult on the moderator. But we need them, and we need to treat them well, and we need to pay them well, and we need to support them psychologically as well as economically in order to prevent this kind of thing.
Yeah. Is there anything in place on, say, Facebook or Twitter? Is there anything in place right now that the board of directors have required them to set standards around that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, pretty much every single major platform, the Meta platforms, Twitter, which is now X, all of them are saying the right things. To be fair, they're very much trying to sort of get ahead of this. Are they doing it enough? My research has revealed that, since 2022, these undress apps have been out there, and they have run millions and millions of times on the various platforms. The tech, no matter how sophisticated the tech person is, it seems like the bad guys are always a half step ahead. We say that in prosecution too, particularly when it comes to the use of technology. No matter how sophisticated we are, people doing bad things are always at least a half step ahead of us. It's fair to say that even a company or companies, even the people taking this really seriously are going to be outwitted. That said, the revenue that they generate, they have the resources to do more than they're doing. The big three challenges, just from the Meta perspective, I can tell you, evolving tactics for evasion is one thing that they talk about all the time, which is what I talked about before. The company's not, the company of course is banned. This tech company that produces, we don't allow that, but they're disguising themselves. There's also inconsistent enforcement and the allocation of resources. The first thing I don't blame the big platforms for. Of course, I want them to use as many, all the resources that they need to, which are vast. I want them to use those resources to deal with that evasion because I still think there are ways to do that if they're willing to spend the money. The last two, inconsistent enforcement and allocation of resources, that's entirely on them. They're yet another institution that are trying to protect themselves, and they're making millions of dollars here. By one estimate, I remember seeing a Wired estimate saying that, this is a conservative estimate. It's like a $40 million a year industry for the tech companies receiving advertising revenue. I understand that they won't be able to prevent all of it, but they need to work really, really hard to prevent more of it than they are.
So I understand you've turned to writing quite a bit, you're a prolific author. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of books you write?
Oh, yeah, sure. They're crime thrillers. You write what you know. So that's what I know. The first book I wrote, called Copperhead Road, is a coming of age story. That is, it's an adult looking back on his adolescent years in the mid 80s. And there's a lot of autobiographical elements to it. I've begun a series, which I'll probably continue. A prosecutor, again, a guy a little like me, although actually in a lot of ways he's not like me at all. Those are crime thrillers that are set in New York City, where I lived and worked for like 17 years. So I get a big kick out of it. Writing it's a wonderful outlet. It's a very, very frustrating hobby. And generally it thank goodness it doesn't pay the bills, but I get a big kick out of it.
And when are you starting your podcast? Because you're clearly going to have a podcast soon.
I don't know. If you guys were to honor me and to bring me on from time to time, I would be more than happy. It's funny. It's a lot of work to do it right, and Crawlspace does it right. There's a million podcasts out there, and I get a kick out of the whole genre. But to me, it's a little like breweries. There's a million people making beer out there, and I'm a big beer lover. But wow, man, I walk into a lot of places with great decor and good theme, and the beer's just not very good. So I think I wouldn't want to do it unless I felt I could do it right. And I don't know that I have the time right now, but we'll see.
I don't think I've heard a better comparison because it's like all the microbreweries.
And it's a great thing. It's kind of like wineries, that same deal. I mean, in a lot of rural places, these wineries have sprung up, and it's a great way to go spend the day. Just the wine's terrible.
That is a great comparison. Wow. Well, Roger, thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. We really appreciate your insight and your time speaking about all these topics.
Thank you all very, very much. Thank you both, Lance and Tim. This has been fantastic. I'm going to continue to stay on top of the research. I speak again regularly with some of the very best women and men in the world who are in the anti-sexual violence movement. There's got to be more to be said. And I really do think in the coming months, between the shift in power in Congress and the shift in power in public opinion, I do think we're gonna learn more about the Epstein situation. I'm not sure what the fallout's going to be, but I think it's going to be talked about, and I'm staying on top of it as much as I can.